Welcome back to Uncorking the Issues, the podcast where we pour clarity into Temecula Valley politics. I'm your host, Grapevine. This podcast discusses political and civic issues. The views expressed are solely those of the host and guests and do not represent any political party, campaign, school district, or government entity. Today's episode is titled Cannabis Bans in Temecula Valley: Revenue, Values, and the Cost of Saying No. Today, we're taking a deeper look at cannabis bans in Temecula and Murrieta. Not just what the policy is, but what it means, who it affects, and what opportunities are being passed over as a result. Cannabis is legal in California. That is not a debate. Voters approved it, the state regulates it, and it is now part of California's legal economy. And yet, here in Temecula and Murrieta, cannabis dispensaries remain prohibited. So the question isn't whether cannabis exists. It clearly does. The real question is why these cities continue to opt out and what the consequences of that choice are for equity, public investment, and local control. Let's start with the legal framework. California law gives cities the authority to decide whether cannabis businesses can operate locally. Temecula and Murrieta have used that authority to ban retail dispensaries. That decision is legal. But legality does not automatically mean it is the best or most equitable policy choice. Supporters of the bans often frame the issue around values. They describe Temecula and Murrieta as family-oriented suburban communities. They argue that dispensaries do not fit the image these cities want to project. They express concerns about youth exposure, normalization of drug use, and cultural impact. But progressive policy asks a different follow-up question. What does family-oriented actually mean in practice? Because families also rely on well-funded schools, safe roads, parks and recreation programs, mental health services, youth programming, emergency services, and all of those things require funding. Across California, cannabis tax revenue has become a meaningful source of funding for exactly those kinds of services. In cities that allow dispensaries, cannabis revenue is often earmarked for public goods, not private profit alone. And it's important to be clear about something. Residents of Temecula and Murrieta already use cannabis. The bans do not stop consumption. They simply determine where the money goes. Instead of staying local, cannabis dollars leave the city. They support other municipalities, often those with fewer resources and fewer options. From a progressive standpoint, that raises an equity issue. Wealthier suburban cities like Temecula and Murrieta benefit from legalization without sharing in the responsibility of regulation, oversight, or reinvestment. They outsource both the economic activity and the social responsibility. Another key issue is regulation versus prohibition. Legal dispensaries are among the most heavily regulated businesses in California. They require strict age verification, product testing, security measures, tracking systems, tax compliance. When dispensaries are legal, cities have leverage. They can determine zoning, limit the number of licenses, set operating standards, direct tax revenue to specific community needs. When dispensaries are banned, that leverage disappears. Cannabis access does not disappear. But oversight does. Residents of Temecula and Murrieta may still purchase cannabis through delivery services or illegal operators without local control, without local standards, without local benefit. There is also a broader historical context that cannot be ignored. Cannabis prohibition has not been enforced evenly. For decades, low-income communities and communities of color were disproportionately targeted for cannabis-related arrests and convictions, even though usage rates were similar across demographics. Legalization was intended in part to address those injustices. But when cities opt out of legal cannabis markets, they also opt out of repair. They opt out of reinvestment. They opt out of job creation. They opt out of participating in a system designed to replace punishment with regulation. Another argument often raised in Temecula and Murrieta is public safety. But state data consistently shows that licensed cannabis dispensaries do not increase crime or reduce property values. In fact, dispensaries often operate with more security than many other retail businesses. Compare that to alcohol. Alcohol is legal, widely available, and socially accepted in Temecula and Murrieta. Its public health impacts are well documented. Yet it is regulated, not banned. From a progressive policy perspective, this raises questions of consistency. If the goal is safety, regulation works better than prohibition. If the goal is control, participation works better than avoidance. This brings us to governance. Cannabis bans in Temecula and Murrieta were not decided by voters directly. They remain city council decisions. City councils are influenced by public comment, election turnout, and organized advocacy. In local politics, a relatively small number of engaged voices can shape outcomes for entire communities. That does not mean councils act in bad faith, but it does mean that silence is often mistaken for agreement. Progressive governance emphasizes participation, transparency, broad input, clear accountability. Some California cities have addressed cannabis policy through ballot measures, allowing voters to decide directly and tying cannabis revenue to specific public benefits. Temecula and Murrieta have not taken that step, which raises an important question. Are these bans reflective of community consensus or political caution? Because avoiding controversy is not the same as serving the public interest, and choosing not to decide is still a decision. In the end, cannabis policy in Temecula and Murrieta is about more than cannabis. It is about how cities adapt to change, how they fund public goods, how they balance image with reality, and how they define responsibility in a legal market that already exists. Banning dispensaries does not make Temecula and Murrieta cannabis-free. It makes them cannabis-dependent on other cities. It shifts revenue away from local needs, and it limits local control over a regulated industry. That is the trade-off. This has been Uncorking the Issues. I'm Grapevine. If you care about equity, transparency, and how local decisions shape real lives in Temecula and Murrieta, these conversations matter. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking the questions that matter.